In recent months, Ukraine has continued to strengthen its military capabilities with the acquisition of advanced Western weaponry. Among these systems are the US-made ATACMS, Army Tactical Missile System, and British Storm Shadow cruise missiles. These long-range precision strike weapons provide Ukraine with the ability to hit targets deep within Russian-held territory or even within Russia itself, raising significant concerns about how Russia might respond to such escalations. The ATACMS, which is capable of hitting targets up to 300 kilometers away, and the Storm Shadow, with a range of approximately 560 kilometers, represent a dramatic enhancement of Ukraine's ability to strike far beyond the front lines. This increase in range and precision is a game-changer, particularly as it could target critical Russian military infrastructure, command and control centers, logistics hubs, and air defense systems that were previously out of reach. The strategic implications: Russia has already made it clear that any attack on its sovereign territory will be met with a firm response. Historically, Moscow has labeled strikes on Russian soil as red lines, with President Vladimir Putin and top Russian officials warning that attacks on the motherland could escalate the conflict significantly. The use of ATACMS or Storm Shadow missiles against targets within Russia would almost certainly be seen as a direct challenge to these red lines, heightening the risk of retaliation. Likely military responses: one of the most likely responses to a Ukrainian attack using these long-range weapons would be a significant escalation in Russian air and missile strikes against Ukrainian military and civilian infrastructure. We might expect Russia to intensify its bombardment of Ukraine's critical energy infrastructure, transportation networks, and communication lines, much like it did during previous retaliations for major Ukrainian attacks. This could potentially lead to widespread blackouts, disruptions in supply chains, and further strain on Ukraine's economy. Another potential response could involve the use of advanced Russian missile systems, such as the Iskander or Kinjal missiles, to strike targets in Kyiv or other major cities, aiming at crippling Ukraine's ability to coordinate further strikes. Russia might also deploy additional air defense systems to protect its key military and industrial installations, particularly in regions near the Ukrainian border or other critical sites that might be within range of Ukrainian missiles. Cyber warfare and hybrid tactics: in addition to military responses, Russia could turn to cyber warfare as a method of retaliation. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has already been marked by significant cyber activities, and Ukraine's use of long-range missiles could provoke further attacks on its critical infrastructure, government systems, and financial institutions. These efforts could be designed to destabilize Ukraine internally, weakening its ability to wage war through non-kinetic means. Hybrid tactics might also come into play. Russia could intensify its efforts to destabilize Ukraine politically or economically by increasing its support for pro-Russian separatist movements in eastern Ukraine or encouraging unrest in other regions. Such strategies could serve as a way for Russia to retaliate without escalating the situation to a full-scale military exchange. Diplomatic maneuvering: beyond military and hybrid responses, Russia may also seek to respond diplomatically by putting pressure on Western nations, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom. Moscow would likely frame any Ukrainian use of ATACMS or Storm Shadows as direct Western involvement in the conflict, accusing these countries of escalating the war and provoking Russia. This narrative could be used to garner support from Russia's allies, like China and Iran, while also trying to weaken NATO's internal cohesion. Russia could also push for a renewed diplomatic effort to force a ceasefire or peace negotiations, using the threat of further escalation as leverage. Such a strategy might aim to convince the West that the provision of these advanced weapons has only worsened the conflict, leading to a dangerous cycle of retaliation that could spiral out of control. Nuclear posturing and testing: one of the more extreme potential responses could involve Russia's nuclear posture. Although an outright nuclear strike remains highly unlikely, particularly given the catastrophic global consequences, Russia might increase its nuclear readiness or conduct military exercises involving its nuclear forces to send a clear signal of deterrence. This would be intended to remind both Ukraine and its Western backers of the serious risks involved in pushing Russia too far. In an even more dramatic scenario, Russia could consider resuming nuclear tests as part of its retaliatory posture. Such a move, though symbolic, would send a powerful message to the international community and demonstrate Russia's willingness to escalate the conflict in a way that directly challenges global non-proliferation norms. A return to nuclear testing could also serve to remind NATO and other global powers of Russia's extensive nuclear arsenal, further heightening tensions. Though nuclear testing has been largely taboo since the Cold War, Russia could frame such a step as a necessary response to what it perceives as existential threats, particularly if its territory is hit by long-range Western-made missiles. The threat of testing could become a bargaining chip in future negotiations or an attempt to coerce Western powers into backing off their support for Ukraine. The role of NATO. Any Ukrainian use of ATACMS or Storm Shadow missiles against Russia would undoubtedly provoke concern within NATO. While these systems would have been provided to Ukraine with the understanding that they would be used to defend against Russian aggression, direct attacks on Russian territory could change the calculus for NATO. There might be increased calls within the alliance for restraint to avoid the risk of provoking Russia into a broader war, particularly one involving nuclear weapons. At the same time, however, NATO would also be faced with the dilemma of supporting Ukraine's legitimate right to self-defense. Balancing these two objectives, supporting Ukraine while avoiding a dangerous escalation with Russia, could lead to increased diplomatic efforts behind the scenes to prevent further escalation. The use of long-range ATACMS or Storm Shadow missiles by Ukraine would represent a significant escalation in the conflict, with far-reaching consequences. Russia's potential responses could range from military retaliation and cyber warfare to nuclear posturing, resuming nuclear tests, and diplomatic maneuvers. All of these actions would carry serious implications for the broader war effort and international stability. The situation remains highly fluid, and any escalation of this kind could risk drawing in other regional or global powers, making the stakes even higher. As Ukraine continues to push back against Russian aggression, the question remains: how far will Russia go to defend what it sees as its vital interests, and how will the international community respond to this new phase of the conflict?